Hi everyone. I'm heading back to the United States because we're talking about social media use for under 16-year-olds. And you'll know it's a big topic here in New Zealand, but there are many people doing wonderful work, particularly in the United States, into this very area. So I'm delighted to bring on to the show Melissa McKay. She is the founding chair of the Digital Childhood Alliance. And so Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
Look, this is a long-term topic and interest of myself and Family First, but it's only really come back onto New Zealand's political radar in the last few weeks. A politician is suggesting that we need to do something. It's pretty amorphous, but I'm very aware of the work that you and others are leading in the United States, and particularly around app stores, which I think is fascinating. But I just wanted to, obviously, as an introduction, how did you get involved into this space, this digital alliance, and advocating for better protections for our young ones?
Sure. It's a great question. I started doing advocacy work about 8 years ago, and it just was born out of my own frustration for family members that I knew, my own kids, nephews, neighbors who were just getting exploited online. Particularly, I had a nephew who was exposed to a tremendous amount of harmful content at school. And at the time, my sister had not allowed her son to have a device. She had filters on all her computers, but nonetheless, he went to school and all of the kids there had devices and he was exposed anyway. And same thing happened to my own son. So I started asking questions. I went to the school counselor. I went to administration. I ended up talking to a state senator and just basically said, how do we as parents protect our kids? We can't be with them all the time. And so he connected me with a lobbyist, and I got my first piece of legislation passed in 2018 about schools and protecting children. So that's how I got started.
That is fantastic. I know we've had Jonathan Haidt. Dr. Jonathan Haidt has been part of our annual forum here in New Zealand, and we've been quite influenced by him, amongst others, I should add. But I was always struck, Melissa, that, as he puts it, we tend to, I don't know if the term is used over there, but helicopter parent in the real world. We're very cautious about a child walking to school or in the playground, and yet we give them a digital device very young, as it turns out in New Zealand, sometimes even primary school, and yet that just opens up an entire dangerous world for them.
Yeah, for not only them, but all of their friends, right? I've heard people say that kids are only as protected as the device of, their weakest link friend, basically. So,
And so how did you end up setting up the Digital Alliance? Obviously, you were lobbying, as you said, you got a piece of legislation passed, but that's clearly expanded now into this alliance.
yeah. So after I passed the piece in 2018, I worked on legislation, congressional hearings. I headed up 2 national movements. I wrote a bunch of letters to Apple's trust and safety team asking them to fix their problems. And finally, I was like, I need to write a piece of legislation because I realized that the root of the problem, the root of the harm is the App Store. You have to go all the way up the technological stack. And it's mainly Apple because 90% of kids who have smartphones have iPhones. So I wrote a piece of legislation with the help of a bunch of people that would regulate app stores, basically. So we got that passed in Utah this year. And last February, when it was clear that it was going to be passed, I knew I needed help getting it passed everywhere else. So that's when we started the Digital Childhood Alliance. Oh, I can't hear you.
Oh, so one of my big faults, Melissa, is I always keep myself muted. I have a little button here. I'm sure that the world loves it when I silence myself, but this is a continual problem of mine. Just stepping back, because I really want to get into the App Store side of things, but what was this piece of legislation that you first had passed in 2018 that you've referenced?
So the 2018 just added some education to school curriculum. It required schools to teach kids in middle schools about, sexting, online dangers, harmful effects of pornography, that kind of stuff. So I started where most advocates start, with thinking education was going to fix a lot of the problems. And I ended with 8 years later, no, we just have to regulate the whole devices because it puts too much onus on the kids to take care of themselves in a Wild West world. 1 or 2 classes isn't enough.
we've found that here, not only around devices, but a whole range of areas. It's always that more education. And I was saying to you briefly before we came on, I used to be in Parliament, and that was always the go-to for politicians. More education, more money for education. And yet nothing really seems to change. And I'm sure it's the same there in America. The growing list of harms is phenomenal. We've just been having some news here in New Zealand around young ones. Again, we're talking primary school age, right through into what we'd call high school. Online AI sexting now. So it's not just accessing images, be it pornographic or violent, but they're now talking to AI systems, masquerading as people. These harms, if you will, just seem to be spiraling.
Yeah, and they're integrating in like schools now. Like they're, the AI Google Gemini, it's to primary school kids. It's just, and I just feel like that to try to counteract that little level of harm with education is like, trying to kill a dragon with like a dart or something. So that's why I ended up every year that I've done this, I've just gotten more and more focused on actually fixing the problem or with what I thought would fix the problem. And this is kind of, I would say, my capstone project of the last 8 years.
Well, that whole focus then is primarily now for you on the app store side of things. So here in New Zealand, as I say, the talk is very general. A lot of it's around effectively a digital ID that to access a Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn. I don't know why a primary or secondary kid would want to be on LinkedIn per se. But, to access that the talk is a digital ID to prove your age. But you're saying, or seem to be lobbying more, it's about getting to the app store. So could you talk us through that?
Absolutely. So, a few years ago, I too was playing whack-a-mole with like Instagram and Snapchat and all of these companies. And I realized that app stores already have ages. They already have all of the sensitive data that they need to understand who's an adult and who is a kid. Because when you sign up for an account, you put in your birth date in like the fourth step. All adults basically have a credit card in their digital wallet already. And any child who's linked to their parent account, the parent has already attested to what their birthday is. So I feel like why ask for more data than you already need if the App Store already has the data and they're brokering these apps, then anything that comes through the App Store should come with an anonymous age range so that you can regulate them for the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act or social media bans or whatever you want. If they're brokering the product, they should have legal responsibilities to help these developers follow the law.
Which I suspect, and please correct me on this, I suspect the big tech companies, I suppose the primary two are Google with its Play Store, isn't it? And Apple's online store. Am I right to think they are probably resisting a lot?
Oh, yeah. I don't know if you've read any of the news here. So we just got the App Store Accountability Act passed in Texas. And before the governor signed it, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, called him and tried to get him to veto it. So, and they spent like $200,000 or $300,000 in ads lying about our bill, basically saying it was sponsored by the porn companies. I think they hired like 20 Oppo lawyers in Texas. They were threatening our representatives. So yeah, they've like pulled out all the stops. You've got a good piece of legislation when they like come that hard at you.
I find it quite remarkable, Melissa, because from what you've described so far, the work that you're leading in this alliance really is grassroots. It sounds like it started as, well, as you say, with yourself as a parent. Now you're fighting Tim Cook and Apple's massive wallet of money and lawyers. So you must actually feel quite proud of what you're achieving.
Oh, I don't know. I wake up every day and it feels not real. It feels like I'm in a game of Among Us, right? Because I am just a mom. I'm a stay-at-home mom. I have 5 kids. And every day I have like Google attacking us. I have some new like Oppo piece from Google I have to rebuttal. And I'm meeting with all of these like tech executives. And I'm just a mom. You have the wrong person obviously here. But yeah, I think that it's this knowledge of how these devices work, how to fix the problems is kind of hard to come by. You have to have done it for years and years and years. So there's very few advocates that not only deeply understand the problem, but how to fix it, and then how to fix it constitutionally is even more difficult.
Certainly the discussions here in New Zealand at the moment, as I say, are sort of focused on age verification at the specific time that you log into Facebook onto Instagram, TikTok, wherever, which is sitting. Again, your commentary on this would be welcome. There's a lot of nervousness, and I have to admit I'm one of them, that to verify a child's age, everybody has to be verified, and so there's sort of a further encroachment into people's privacy. And I better be clear, for your sake and for viewers and listeners. I'm not trying to get up to surreptitious behaviour online, but there's an element and a real concern here that if it's an age verification at that level, it's an overreach by government. Were those similar concerns there in the States, which is what also drew you towards the app side?
Well, developer side, I think anytime you're going into social media, anything with the terms of service agreement is more or less a contract. So if you're having kids sign contracts, you kind of need to know who's the adult and who's the kid. But the reason it's so convenient at the App Store level, where they make you sign a contract just to get an account, is that, like I said, the age is already there for adults and the age is already there for kids. So the whole privacy argument kind of goes away when you go up the stack to where they already have the data.
Yeah, which I love the idea. And I'm not just saying that because we're chatting, as when it was first being mooted here again as a topic, because it pops up from time to time and is being dismissed, but things are getting more and more out of control here in New Zealand. And we're beginning to see the consequences in our young ones, particularly how they're relating to teachers and their peers. But I'll be honest, I was grappling with the age verification, and it was your name that popped up in an article around the App Store. And again, I thought, brilliant. As you say, they already know it's linked to the device. You can then somewhat safely give a device to a child and control exactly what is and isn't on there. So you mentioned Texas has passed the law. Has Utah as well? And what other jurisdictions are going down the app side?
Yeah, so Utah passed it first, and then it kind of exploded. It started in I think it was 13 different states, but they weren't clean versions. So what happens is, with all legislation, is you have all these tech companies try to come in and tweak them. So we had the Meta version, we had the Pornhub version that was more of a device level. There was the AT&T carve out. So what our alliance did was go around and kill or substitute in a lot of these states. So far past, we've only had Utah, Texas, and we have Louisiana and Ohio on deck. This bill has been introduced federally, but next year it'll probably be introduced in every other state, at least 30 other states.
That's amazing. Well, isn't it again a real sign of something that can start quite small and simple, but if it's good and right, it really expands? You mentioned federally, so has I don't fully understand the American system. New Zealand, we only have 120 MPs and that's it, and no constitution. Yours gets a bit more complicated. So what is happening on the federal level, and is that the ideal, that there's a single piece of federal law rather than every state?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been introduced by Senator Mike Lee, who's my senator, and I've been working with him for 8 years. So when this came up, I was like, okay, obviously I know who this is going to, and Representative John James in the House. So the goal is to get it passed federally, and it will hopefully swallow up all the different states and their little quirky laws, because states pass, there's always some little nuance, and the gold standard would be something that covers all 50 states.
So what's been the resistance then, as far as you can speak on behalf of the Apples and Googles and the big techs? I mean, what's their resistance? I mean, do they not understand the harms that children are experiencing? Is it they don't care? Is it that they think there's a much better solution? Is this costly to them? I mean, why are they so resistant?
Yeah, so it's costly. So there's 3 parts of the bill. Let me talk about each of those for a sec. The first part is it requires any child under 18 to be linked to a parent account, and for every app download and every in-app purchase to require consent. And up until this point, it only required kids under 13 to be linked to a parent, and no consent was required. So the age 13 to 17 bracket is a cash cow for these app stores, right? They have underdeveloped brains. They're just going to buy stuff and download stuff. They're going to be spending 5 hours a day on TikTok. They do not want to give that up. They don't want parents in the picture. So, I mean, that's the first part. The second part is that apps right now are self-rated. It's not like movies or video games where there's a third-party group that are rating the apps. It's the developer themselves, like TikTok, saying, we think we're okay for 12 and older. So if our law gives teeth to be able to sue apps that are misrepresenting their safety disclosures. So if all the TikToks and the Instagram of the world are now rated 17 or 18, and then it sets the stage for like future legislation for even bans, particularly. And so they're about to lose this whole group of kids, not only to consent, but now also to safety disclosures. And the third part is it requires the app stores to communicate this age range to the developers. And so now they're on the hook for handling the age verification. Why? Well, because they have it and they're brokering the product. So they should, right? And they take 30%. They're taking 30% commission on everything in the App Store. You think that they'd be at the minimum responsible for safety, right? So they tend to lose in three different areas on this bill. So I've seen all of the substitute bills that Google's put out. I've seen all the red lines from Apple. They just want to gut the bill. Like they're not interested in giving us anything, any kind of ground. They're only trying to discredit us and to gut the bill, but they don't have any good arguments against it. Like, how can you argue against consent and transparency?
Well, again, my cynical side, having been in politics, not in this particular area, I am I'm very cynical. It is remarkable what various groups, and by the way, I'm not just talking the tech companies, often big companies, as you'd imagine, Melissa, they're driven by money. That's their bottom line to their shareholders. They just will push back on anything that is going to cut into that financial profit, even when we're talking about kids here. So, I mean, clearly, well, sorry, I shouldn't actually phrase it like that. I wonder, do you get widespread support from parents? Or, I mean, obviously there's 50 states in the US, but is there widespread support and then, if you will, frustration at these big tech companies that they're not prepared to support the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so we've done polling nationally and in some states where we've run it, and across the board, 85, 90% of parents want this solution. So parents are completely on board with it. The only resistance we get from parents is through confusion. If they think that they're going to have to upload a birth certificate, if they kind of fall into the scare mentality, they'll resist it. But anyone who fully understands the bill basically supports it. And the great thing is that even social media companies support this legislation now. So now it's kind of advocates and Meta and TikTok and Snap and X against Apple and Google. So we even have some industry support, which that if in legislature, if you don't have industry support, it basically goes nowhere. So I'm actually quite pleased about that.
I should have actually thought about that, and I hadn't until you just mentioned it. Of course, the likes of Facebook and TikTok will be, in a sense, relieved because they're not going to be responsible or financially, well, I suppose they'll be impacted a little bit if I heard you right earlier, if they're going to lose that, was it the 13 to 18-year-olds, there will be fewer of them. But yeah, I can see why the Metas of the world would be relieved, but they're used to fighting with old Tim Cook and his mates.
Yeah, and the great thing about this bill is there's a whole slew of developer obligations too. It's almost 50-50 app stores and developers to keep kids safe. But I think the social media companies of the world, and I actually fought with them for quite a while on the language. Like I mentioned, I went and killed a bunch of bills. But I think they're like, this is good enough. We're willing to be regulated in this way. Like they're not thrilled about the way I wrote the law because they don't like the private right of action. They don't like some of the developer obligations. But I feel like it's good enough for them.
Again, I think it's quite exciting. For me, as you've mentioned a couple of times, you're a mum of five living there in Utah, and yet all of this has started through your advocacy. I mean, obviously the Alliance has grown, but are you getting quite widespread support, not just from parents, and obviously you mentioned the likes of Meta and that, but I mean, a major, I don't know, lawyers and other advocacy groups kicking in behind you to sort of amplify the work you're doing?
Yeah, we have over 100 child advocacy groups who now are supporting the bill. So basically, anyone who has read the bill, taken the time to understand it, I've been able to clear up misconceptions, they almost always jump on board. Because like I said, how can you fight with parental consent and transparency? This bill is very simple, it's clean. I've heard people say it's one of the most elegant child safety bills they've ever read. So it's really easy for people to get on board because there's not a whole lot in there that you can argue over.
So just teasing out then the bill in those three aspects. So why did you choose 18? We here in New Zealand are debating 16 and under. There's some that argue a little bit around that, but you've clearly chosen 18. So talk us through that.
Sure. It's when I went to get this bill drafted, because it was just it started as a PowerPoint presentation, and I took it to an attorney and I said, I need to legally write what I want done. And he said, well, it has to be based on contract law, existing contract law, which is that every app download, every time you create an account, it's a contract. And in the United States, kids under 18 can't sign contracts on their own. They're not binding. So that's how we ended up with the 18, is just this idea that this whole thing is based on contract law, transparency. You can't give somebody a contract that isn't accurate, right? You can't say, this is what you're agreeing to, and then that's fake. So every piece in this bill is built on the foundation that app stores are trying to contract with kids. So, and obviously that's 18, not 16.
Again, there's just a real elegance in what you're doing. And so if I put my former political hat on, let alone the work I do with Family First now, again, it's what you just said. It's clean, simple, and quite elegant. Working the system as it already is. And, when you put it as you've just done, I'm sure viewers will be picking up on this too. At the moment, these companies are asking your children to sign legal contracts, which is nuts. We wouldn't let our kids go out and buy a house or a car or anything. But, again, we give them access to the internet. So that makes a lot of sense. And I think New Zealand's contract law would be similar there. The second that you were talking around was the whole thing of consent. I suppose that's linked to the contract as well, but needing the parents' consent. Just want to stretch that out a bit for us.
Sure. So, like I said, when you download an app, and I don't know if you've ever looked up a terms of service agreement. In order to get an Apple account, they make you sign 3 separate terms of service agreements that are about 30,000 words each. And they have indemnification clauses. They have, tracking, ability to track you, and, binding everything. And so TikTok, if you break down what kids are agreeing to, it's basically access to their camera, their microphone, their contact list, exact location on their map, and like 10 other things. So we're saying if kids are agreeing to that, they need consent of a parent, someone who's old enough, who actually has the legal ability to consent. And so every time you download an app, we're saying a parent should be involved in that. They should at least be given the minimum amount of information to say, I'm okay with these companies tracking my kid. Same with in-app purchases. It's ongoing financial agreements, a lot of them. And America has an FTC consent decree right now, since I think it's like 10 years old, where they already should be getting consent for every in-app purchase. They're just not. So we already have some existing law.
Just quickly, FTC?
Yep, FTC consent decree. Apple, Google, you can Google it.
Okay, I'll have to look that up. It's an acronym I'm not familiar with.
The Federal Trade Commission.
That's the one. Thank you. Sorry, what is the FTC?
Yeah. Oh, I meant Google if you want to see the rule, but yeah, FTC is the Federal Trade Commission.
What do you say to those? And look, I'd be one of them. When I've signed up to Apple and all these other things, I refused to sign up to TikTok for a variety of reasons. Again, the amount of data they collect is phenomenal. I don't think, kids certainly don't understand it. I don't know why parents even sign up to it too. In fact, again, in my parliamentary days was actually engaging with TikTok, asking where all the data was stored. I can tell you it's not in New Zealand and it's not in America. It's all back in Beijing. But it's phenomenal amounts of data. To what extent, though, do you think the parents understand just what is being handed over? Because most people just scroll to the bottom, agree to all, don't even think about it. Do we need to educate the parents a bit more into this?
Well, the way the bill is written, it requires certain disclosures under when a parent's about to consent, we're demanding that they show the parent at least like 5 pieces of data, right? The app age rating, the content descriptors, and then a lot about the privacy and kind of what data they're collecting. So it's going to be way better than now. When parents consent right now, the agree or the decline button is at the top of their screen, and the only data that you really get is this tiny little gray rating that isn't accurate anyway. So whatever this bill does, it's going to be way better than what we've got now. And I think more parents will think twice. Like if they're going to download TikTok and it says rated for kids 18 and older, and then it gives you a whole scare list of what it's collecting, what it's going to do, what is actually in there for the content, I think that we can start turning the tide to empower parents again. Because right now they just don't, a lot of them don't know. So much of the education I do is parents saying, oh, Snapchat, that's that funny little like filter app, right? And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, no, it's like sexting and Snap Maps and like the Discover News, all these horrible things, but right now they're not disclosing it. So parents are getting tricked. And like you would think at a minimum, full disclosure would be the absolute bare minimum that, parents should understand what they're getting into.
I really love the idea of what do you call it, a scare list. I like the idea of legislating or regulating to say, actually, to this app developer, you need to say, so let's use ByteDance or TikTok. Yeah, you're going to have to list all or at least a good sample of what that data is you're collecting front and center. I think that's a very, again, to use an earlier word, a very elegant solution. And you've talked around to the developers that they are it's not self-managing,
Rated?
self-rated.
Yeah.
So how is your legislation working on that? Do we need to have a regulatory body now that is reviewing? How is that going to work?
So at the states, we just open up potential liability and litigation because what's been happening right now is the developers say, oh, it's the App Store's fault. And then the App Store says it's the developer's fault. So you get that like Spider-Man meme where they're blaming each other. So at the state level, we're just opening up at litigation, but at the federal level, we create a regulatory body and a yearly certification for app stores. And if they don't get certified, they can get sued. So they're going to be very motivated to make sure that their age ratings are accurate, that the consent is valid, that kids are being supervised. So all of a sudden, and this is what I found after 8 years of work, like if you can regulate this device, like you will protect kids with one stop or, two stops, Apple Play, Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. And that would cover like 90% of the harm right now that's happening. And I don't know why we're like playing whack-a-mole with even all these social media companies, because even if you regulate social media companies, there's still the dating apps, right? And then there's all the companies that don't get defined as social media like YouTube that are still problematic. So I feel like that with regulation, unless you want to play whack-a-mole for the next 10 years, you got to go up to the app stores.
I'm 100% with you. I've even raised that with a few of the former political colleagues who are now sort of interested. It's like, guys, you'll never be able to do an exhaustive list of websites. The choke point, and again, it's pretty much inspired by the work you're doing, which is why I'm so delighted you've come on the podcast and the chance to chat. The App Store, or stores, sorry, I should use the plural, that's the choke point. It's already there. And it just makes so much sense. New Zealand will struggle a little bit. Well, we're not as litigious as the United States, so we don't tend to draw as many lawsuits in that space. But I think there's creative ways that we can approach it. So, I mean, again, it's an elegant piece of law. What would be your, if I could put it in two ways, firstly, the encouragement to a country like New Zealand and other places, from your experience, what would be your encouragement? It clearly is around App Store legislation. Is there anything else that you would sort of advise informally?
So App Store legislation, there's going to be a lot of downstream effects benefiting if they regulate app stores. So I would start with app stores. One of the biggest problems with devices is there's no safety defaults for kids 13 through 18. But the reason is that a huge percentage of kids don't have parents linked to their account to manage those safety defaults. For example, the porn filter on phones. Apple will default it on for kids under 13, but not for kids under 18. And they gave us a really stupid reason why they wouldn't do it. But I think it's basically that a lot of 13 through 18-year-olds aren't connected to a parent account to manage the password. So if you start with App Store accountability, it's going to fix a whole host of problems that aren't even in the bill.
God, I hadn't even thought about that. But as you talk about the 13 to 18-year-olds, I'm just struck by what you said much earlier on, which is it's a real strong market for these companies, and arguably it's where a lot of these young ones get hooked. I'm a step parent to 5 in my case, Melissa, and we've been relatively okay with the young ones, but I've been struck the rabbit holes which they can be taken down with something like YouTube. They're starting their homework, and next minute they're in some sort of weird Russian propaganda saying, how did that happen? And we're trying our best, but also just that particular, those teenage years where they're connecting with their friends through the apps to try and pull them away from it, can be immensely challenging. So if I might, and it's probably a more personal question, you're a mum of 5, you are working deeply in this area. What's your advice to parents?
Oh, this is a tough one because I'm on both sides. Like, part of my brain is like, just don't give kids technology at all until we're more regulated. Because why not? Right now, it's the Wild West. And it doesn't matter how many hours you spend on parental controls. It doesn't matter how well you supervise. The risk reward is just almost not there right now. But I also have 4 boys who love technology. So I would say to parents, like do as little as possible and delay as long as possible.
Yeah, it was certainly some of the discussion we had at our forum last year it was how to encourage parents to collectively, again, it's influenced by Haidt and others, as in Jonathan Haidt and others, that actually you try not to give them technology. But it always struck me as a bit of a challenge, trying to get the community to do something together at the same time is a nice idea, but hard at the best of times. But there's a ubiquity with these devices now, and I've certainly found with my own, well, they're no longer kids now, but when they were, very hard for them not to have something which all their peers do, which is why I just keep coming back to that elegant word of what you've developed here. I'm just, again, grateful that you're taking the time to talk us through it, and it's encouraging to know that a number of states are now following the work that you're doing there through the Digital Childhood Alliance. Is there any last sort of, before we wrap up, anything particular that has struck you from parents that you've engaged with in terms of their feedback? Obviously, you're battling the Apples and the Googles, but there must be many parents from around Utah and now Texas and elsewhere who are just saying, Melissa, thank you. I don't know if there's anything that particularly jumped out or struck you over those years.
I think that every parent, it's a collective suffering right now, raising kids in the digital era. Like, we all recognize it wasn't like when we were raised. Like, I was raised running in fields, toilet papering people's houses, doing sleepovers. I had a very wholesome childhood. The very first phone I got was in college, and it was like a brick phone. So I think we're all just struggling with the fact that we don't necessarily understand this technology, and any kind of regulation, any kind of help, parents are just so grateful for. So I would say jump in the fight. Like, I'm just a mom, and I feel like legislators listen to me more because I'm not a lobbyist, because I'm not a professional. Like, they feel like it's a fresh, authentic perspective. So I would encourage all parents to become, involved legislatively.
Can I just echo that? I mean, I know many lovely lobbyists here in New Zealand. They do, an important job, believe it or not. But actually, there is something about when mums come to your political office and start talking. It's that real world experience. If I might say too, Melissa, it's sort of a grounded empathy as well. Look, I'm just so grateful for your time and to just explain more fully this idea. I personally think it's the way forward here in New Zealand. And again, I'm not just saying that because we're talking here. I've struggled with how we balance the rights of everyone's privacy and digital IDs and wider dynamics, which, yeah, I won't repeat far too much of that, but it's been something I've struggled with, and coming across what you've done is just like, oh my God, this is brilliant. And it just makes so much sense. So look, thank you for your work, and we'll be continuing to follow this here in New Zealand. Hopefully, we might follow suit, and your work will have not only expanded from Utah, but down here in little old New Zealand. So thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, happy to do it anytime. And if you find someone who wants to talk to me about the legislation, send them my way. We'll get you started there.
I will actually take you up on that offer. I will actually handshake you across to some of the relevant MPs. I think it would be amazing. Melissa, thanks so much for your time.
So good to see you. Thank you so much.